Hello and welcome back, folks. This is our final lesson of our summer quarter. My name is Bruce, and our lesson today is entitled Miracles on Malta. And it comes from, Acts verse 28, verses 1 through 10. The time of writing is AD 59 or AD 60. The place is Malta. And as we look at our golden text, Paul entered in and prayed and laid his hands on him and healed him. And that comes from Acts chapter 28 and verse 8. And what is truly interesting and unique about our golden text is how much it mirrors our verse from last week. As we remember, as Ananias would come in and lay hands on Paul, and then Paul would receive the healing that he needed. So as we look at this lesson, and it is important that I kind of lay it out for you all, and please bear with me, I'm going to be as quick as possible. But we are, again, as I said, in AD 59 or 60. But to be honest with you, this lesson really started 2 years prior, or this whole episode, if you will, started 2 years prior in either 57 or 58 AD. And it started when Paul was he had unction to go back to Jerusalem, and he had been warned, and he had been told, and numerous people tried to get him to think about it or delay it or not go, because again they felt the winds were against Paul. Should he enter into Jerusalem, and even they got to the point where they tried to set it up where Paul would be ceremonially clean. He would do certain things, and so if he was found, then they couldn't use that against him, especially being that Paul was a apostle to the Gentiles. And those of you that have been following us throughout this quarter, that the Jews had special rules, if you will, for any time that they entered into a Gentile home. And so they tried to, as best as they can, cover all the bases. Unfortunately, the thing about haters, and a lot of you all listening to my voice have had to deal with haters, and Paul's haters caught him in the temple one day, and they essentially they raised a fuss, and they got all of the people to kind of turn on him, or again, they came up with these false, or they were just lies. They were accusing him of things that were false, riling up the people so that they would, in fact, attack Paul. And so Paul is now being attacked. He's been dragged out of the temple. He's been attacked by the people that were in and around it. And the Roman soldiers are listening and hearing the commotion, and so they all rush out, right? And they rush out and kind of break it up, and they see Paul in the middle. He's getting a beat down, and they pull him out, and the people are just screaming. No one can. The soldiers can't figure out what is really going on because everyone is talking at the same time, and so the commander decides, hey, we're going to take him inside of the barracks. We need to get to the bottom of this, right? And so before they took him into the barracks, Paul asked for permission to speak to them. And, he spoke, and again, when your heart is made up, when your mind is made up, or you're going to do something, you're not going to listen to reason. And the people didn't listen to reason. And so the commander had them taken in because they were threatening. They were going to overtake the soldiers and, do what they wanted to do to Paul. So they took him in. They interrogated him, and he was about to be flogged for no good reason. But the commander, because again, that's just what they did at that time. And then Paul says, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, and I have not been found guilty of any charge. And so the soldiers that are there, they're like, oh, because there was big punishment for any person who punished a Roman citizen before they were found guilty. And those soldiers knew it, and the commander knew it. And so the commander says, okay, well, we're not going to flog you. We're going to take you before the governor, and then you can plead your case to the governor. So he goes before the governor, Felix, Felix, I'm sorry. So he goes before Felix, and, he presents his case. And, unfortunately for him, and he was led by the Holy Spirit. And so they could not poke holes in his defense. And even Felix was like, well, you guys have not come up with a charge that, I can say for certain that this man needs to die for. And so because he was looking for a bride, he just kind of let Paul sit in custody, if you will. And so now 2 years has passed, and the next governor comes on the scene, and again, he calls him up, and Paul presents his case. Again, his defense is flawless, and yet this particular governor, Festus, he's wanting to stay on the good side of the Jews. So he leaves Paul locked up, right? So now Paul has already before asked to be sent before Caesar, because again, the Jews had no intentions on giving him a fair trial. They just really wanted to kill him. And they even tried to get one of the governors to release him, release him to them or release him to be sent back to Jerusalem, so that they could just kill him along the way. And somehow, some way, Paul's sister's son found out and relayed the message to the commander, and certain moves had to be made to get Paul out of there. And so now he's gone before two governors, and now King Herod has come on the scene because he wants to. He's there for celebration, if you will. And so the governor's explaining to him what is going on. I have this man. He has a curious case. I haven't heard anything that would certainly demand that this man's life be taken. But, this is what I have going on, and tell me what you think. And King Herod says, well, I want to hear this man, speak for myself. And so the governor has Paul brought out in front of the king and everybody else. And there's a bunch of people, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance. And again, Paul offers up a defense to now King Herod. And even King Herod, even though he made a snide remark asking Paul, well, did he think that he was going to turn him into a Christian at that spot? And Paul says, no, but I hope that before you leave this world, that you recognize that Jesus is the Son of God. And so they walk off and they say, well, he hasn't done anything. And had he not appealed to Caesar, then they would have released him. But again, it was already foretold that he would go and speak in Rome. So now Paul has been put on a grain ship, and now they are putting out to go to Rome. And so Paul, as he has done, he has found favor, because even though he was in bondage, if you will, the governor allowed him certain freedoms. He was still watched by a centurion, but he allowed his friends to come and take care of his needs and different things of that nature. And so even when he was turned over to the centurion, Paul found favor even with that centurion. And so again, as they would go from different place to different place, he would allow Paul to get off the boat and go and handle whatever he needed to handle. So they got to a point where Paul is like, I don't know if we need to continue on this journey, because Spirit is telling me something is coming up, something is brewing. And the centurion, essentially we have a schedule to keep, and we need to keep on. We need to press on. Unfortunately for the centurion, Paul was right, because they ran right into the middle of a storm, a very violent storm that lasted 2 weeks. So they were in the middle of the water for 2 weeks, couldn't see anything, couldn't see land, couldn't see the sky, couldn't see the stars at night, couldn't see the sun or the moon. And they got to the point where they're having to throw things off the boat and bail water. And unfortunately, eventually they ran aground and had to abandon ship. And so and there were 276 men and possibly women on this ship, but we know there was 276, more than likely they were all men on this ship. And scripture, and you're going to see in our lesson that God protected each and every one of them. And it was, again, had a lot to do with the fact that Paul was in their midst, which brings me to one of the points that I gathered from this lesson. And that is, God will bless those around you just because you're in the midst, right? A lot of you all, you have such a strong relationship with God. Your faith is so strong. Your commitment, your walk is upright. Well, God will bless those around you, again, like I said, just simply because you're in the midst. And so as we begin and as we begin to look at this lesson, the experience of the Apostle Paul teaches us that the Lord opens doors of service even when things are not normal. In fact, folks, it can be argued that Paul never had the luxury of a normal life. His witness took him through very disruptive experiences, including beatings, riots, imprisonment, and shipwrecks, which we find in this week's lesson. In this week's lesson, we find him on a foreign island among unfamiliar people, yet even there, God opened opportunities for him to minister. Many of us struggle with the concept of faith. Simply put, it is an implicit trust that God will perform what he said he will do in his word. This week, we look at the results of Paul trusting God, because again, as I said, folks, God had already told him, you're going to Rome. You're going to speak for me in Rome. And again, God is a promise keeper. God is not a liar. So again, it's not a matter of if he's going to do what he said. It's just when. And it is our job to continue to keep the faith no matter what the situation looks like. And I love this, folks. Faith honors God and God honors faith. God honored Paul's faith by providing him with opportunities to continue his ministry on the island of Malta. Even under normal conditions, and those of you that are heads of ministry, or those of you that have been pastors or elders or ministers over different departments, you understand that even under normal circumstances, any ministry is a difficult task. Ministering under adverse conditions can become nearly an impossible task. Paul was able to serve faithfully because he was a man of faith, trusting the Lord in the midst of all kinds of circumstances, right? So again, Paul didn't care what the situation looked like. He knew that God had his back. He knew that he could trust him completely. Again, it's the same God that was dealing with Paul, the same God today. If Paul can trust him completely, you can trust him completely. I trust him completely. As we look at today's aim, the facts of our lesson is to show the events that took place on Malta and how God worked healings through faith. The principle of our lesson is to teach that God answers the prayer of faith. Application of our lesson is to encourage faith in God, who has promised to answer our prayers when we put our trust in him. But you got to put your trust in him first. As we look at the location, which covers Acts 28:1, and in verse 1 it says, and when they were escaped, they knew that the island was called Melita. And so, as I said in the beginning, folks, they were in the middle of the storm for 2 weeks, and they didn't recognize, they couldn't see really, but they didn't recognize the area that they were in. And so it wasn't until they actually got all the way on land that they realized that, oh, okay, well, we're on Melita, which is what it was called then. Today, we know it as Malta. And so as we look at, and Paul, who was being taken to Rome to appeal to the emperor the case the Jews had brought against him, was on a ship that had been driven by a storm and grounded on an island called Melita, today called Malta. Though the soldiers had probably landed at its main port, Valletta, many times, they had not recognized the spot on the eastern coast where they ran aground. The island name comes from the Phoenician or Canaanite word for refuge and was so named by the Phoenician sailors who colonized it about 1000 BC. It is a small island about 18 miles long and 8 miles wide, located 60 miles south of Sicily. It was at one point a part of the Carthage Empire, but the Romans captured it in 218 BC. At some time we all have wondered what God is doing in our lives. And if we're all being honest, because again, the storms of life come, and sometimes, you have those moments where you're like, I don't know, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where God is taking me. Yes, ultimately, that, it's for your good. But in the moment when you're in your human and you're in your humanity and you're dealing with emotions, well, you may wonder what God is doing. So especially when we when we find ourselves in some strange and unknown circumstance, we often ask ourselves questions like, well, what am I doing here? Or why is this happening to me now? Right? Nothing happens to the Christian believer without God's planning something wonderful, even through the most difficult circumstances. Paul was soon to learn that there was a ministry opportunity awaiting him. So again, even in the middle of a shipwreck, right? Even in the middle of what you might consider to be, the worst, there could still be an opportunity for you to preach Christ to someone. As we look at verse 2, the reception, and the barbarous people shewed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us everyone because of the present rain and because of the cold. So let me put it in perspective. Again, there were 276 people on this boat. Every last one of them made it to shore. And to be quite honest with you folks, during the storm, when everyone was probably extremely nervous, thought that they were probably going to die, Paul was like, hey, everybody, calm down. God has told me we're all going to make it. We're all going to make it. Don't worry about it. It looks bad. You can't see in front of you. The wind is whipping. The rain is coming in. The water's coming into the boat. We're all going to be fine. We're all going to make it to land. And so when they made it to land, so these barbarous people, if you will, and barbarous is only here because these folks spoke a language that the Romans or the Greeks on that ship didn't speak. So it didn't have anything to do with the way they carried themselves. They weren't savages. They just spoke a different language. And so we see the word barbarous used to describe them. And again, and as you think about a barbarian would not show kindness, if you will, the way that we see the islanders show these shipwrecked individuals. And so again, they kindled a fire, right? They see them coming up out of the water. They know that they're cold. Again, they're getting ready to go into winter. So it's cold, it's wet. They are doing everything that they can to get these people out of the water, to get them dry and get them warm. And so again, as we look at question number 1, and I've kind of already answered it, but what did the Greeks and Romans mean when they referred to others as barbarous people? Well, again, barbarous people translated barbarians does not mean savage or crude persons. It was used by the Greeks and later the Romans to describe people who were not of themselves, specifically those who spoke with unintelligible sounds. These islanders no doubt used the Carthaginian, if I can get it out, dialect of the Phoenician language unknown to Greeks and Romans. They proved to be hospitable to the stranded travelers. The islanders demonstrated no small degree of kindness, an understated way of saying their kindness was extraordinary. Again, it's 276 people. They're in the middle of an island. They are too dealing with this storm, and yet they're not holding back their supplies or their goods. They're making sure that they cover these people's needs. So we look at question number 2. Question number 2 asks, what did the islanders do for the travelers when they arrived? And again, we've already pretty much answered it, but they built a fire and welcomed every one of the castaways. It must have been a sizable fire, for there were, as I said, 276 travelers, and all of them were accommodated. So again, God is always, even when you don't think so, he's always making a way. He's always providing for your needs, the same way he provided for these sailors' needs in the middle of this storm. The islanders, though pagans, showed a human kindness that even Christians, regrettably, have sometimes lacked. And listen, folks, there are people that don't believe in Christ, that don't know the Lord, but they'll give you the shirt off their back. They will go above and beyond to help someone that needs help. As Christians, that should be us. We should all be categorized by the way we serve each other and the way we serve those that we encounter in our daily walk. God is in charge even when our world seems to be falling apart. Often he is preparing the stage for his next big miracle. So again, even when you think that this situation can't get worse, or when you think that, well, there's no coming back from this, oh, God is setting you up for a major comeback. And this next statement, folks, I truly love, and it blessed me so. Kindness is the only language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. Again, kindness is the only language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. Again, that should define us as Christians, especially those of us that identify as Christians. As we look at the first practical point that covers verses 1 and 2, God always has the right people in the right place at the right time to accomplish his purpose. I'm going to say it again. God always has the right people in the right place at the right time to accomplish his purpose. Again, as they were coming off that boat, they could have landed on an island that didn't have anybody. And then they would have been literally stuck trying to fend for themselves. And oh, by the way, winter is coming and they're going to be here for 3 months. So imagine if they would have landed on an island where they didn't have, or the people were not in a position to provide for their needs. As I said before, God always takes care of the situation. Even when you don't think that he is, he is. Paul's snake bite covers Acts 28 and verse 3. And as we look at verse 3, and when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. So, as I said to the seniors in their video, no good deed goes unpunished, right? So here's Paul, one of the greatest missionaries of all time. He is a leader of men, right? And again, he was on that boat too. He probably needed some type of assistance. But again, there he was. No. Take care of the others first. Matter of fact, while you're taking care of them, I'll be over here helping out. Because I don't find that it's not beneath me to gather sticks. And even though I'm a prisoner, even though I am who I am, even though I'm recognized, by others, again, as a leader, it's nothing to me. It's nothing to me to go over here and do some menial job. And the parallel for us today is, I don't care what your title is. And you shouldn't care what your title is. If there's an opportunity to do something that's not your job because it's someone else's, or it's a lesser job, well, don't forsake it because I'm the pastor, or I'm the head of the I'm the head of the music department, or I'm over this department or over that department. Help out, because again, you can't understate how big that is for other people to see. Well, if he cares about it, then I should care about it. And so as he's helping out, doing what you should do as you serve others and not only simply worry about yourself and your own needs, as he's doing that, the fire heats up, and this snake, which has probably just been there just kind of dormant, now comes alive. And we are all familiar with snakes. Snakes strike and then they retreat. You know what I mean? This particular viper, not only did he strike, but he latched on. So he's standing there with a snake literally hanging from his hand. And again, as we look, and we're going to see when we get to it, you're going to see how the islanders are going to react. And again, this was a poisonous snake. You know, not to be confused with a snake that looks poisonous, but it's really not. This was a poisonous snake, and you see God's divine protection over Paul. Because again, as I said earlier, folks, it had already been foretold he was going to go to Rome. He was going to speak in Rome and represent God to those people and to the leadership. So again, he wasn't going to God wasn't going to allow Paul to make it through this shipwreck, stuck at sea or to make it out of that alive, only to get to shore to be killed by a snake. And as we look at, again, Paul's snake bite, as Paul had assumed a useful role on the ship during the storm, so he continued to make himself useful on land. He gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire. It speaks well of his Christ-like character, folks, that he not only took leadership and gave commands when necessary, but now also assumed a medial role. Paul's servant heart was always evident. Again, as Christians, we should embody that. We should embody that heart of servitude. The viper was a poisonous snake and was recognized as such by the islanders. Paul was faithful to God and living as a true servant, but this did not, and that's important, folks, this did not keep him from this trial. His humble service brought out a viper that didn't just nibble on Paul, it fastened on his hand. And you're going to see from this particular incident that this is also going to open the door for the inhabitants on the island as they watch him and wait for what they believe is the inevitable. So as we look at practical point number 2, which covers verse 3, as I said earlier, folks, no task is too demeaning for a good leader. Again, no task is too demeaning for a good leader. Listen, if you are a good leader, if that's your ministry that you started, or if that's your company that you grew from the ground up, you're not going to look at any job and say, well, I got somebody for that because that job is too small for me. Again, as I said, you are the example. If others see you stop, pick up the paper, or straighten the Bibles in the pew, or make sure, something is taken care of, then they're going to be vigilant. The same thing in the secular world. If you are the CEO, the boss, you walk in and you see something out of place, you go ahead on and fix it. And everybody around you is going to see, oh, well, the boss doesn't. Then you'll see they'll run ahead of you to make sure that you don't have to do that. But they need to see you do it to see that you care. So as we look at the people's interpretation, which covers verse 4, as I said earlier, and when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, no doubt this man is a murderer, who though he have escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. So in their mind, because again, you're remembering, folks, that these are idol worshipers, right? So they're looking at this from their ideological viewpoint, and they're like, yeah, this man is a criminal. And while maybe even he was spared from death at sea, the justice is not going to let him live. Justice is going to make sure that he gets his comeuppance. And so, they're looking at him like, and to be honest, folks, this is true human behavior, right? So you're going to see them go through these wild swings of emotion. At one point, they're like, well, you're going to see he's a criminal and he's getting his just desserts. But as we get later on into our lesson, you're going to see them do a complete 180 and go from one thought to another thought. And then again, they're going to go back to another thought once they get all of the information. And so it's important, folks, that we not, again, make rash judgments about people that we see or people that we run across in our daily lives. Because again, you're going to see they're going to make a rash judgment, and ultimately they're going to be wrong. And again, as I said earlier, this is going to open the door for him to minister to them. You want to know how I was able to survive the viper bite? Well, let me tell you. His name is Jesus. And let me tell you about what he did and how he can give you peace and how God is ready to graft you in. And so the superstitious islanders quickly reached their own conclusion. When they saw the snake dangling from Paul's hand, they thought he was a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. And so as we look at our question number 3, folks, why did the people first think Paul was a murderer? Well, let me tell you, Paul could not escape this destiny. They believed a murderer might survive the storm and seem to be safe, but vengeance would catch up with him. And so, again, as I said, even though Paul had more freedom, if you will, than your typical prisoner would, he was still a prisoner and he was still in custody and he was still on his way to Rome to provide a defense for a charge that was leveled against him. The Greek word here more often means justice, and sometimes it was personified to mean an actual goddess. Again, remember, these folks were idol worshipers who punished the guilty. Dike was her name. Thus, the islanders may have been referring to this deity, or perhaps they were simply personifying divine retribution. Again, you did something wrong and life was going to make sure you got yours. In either case, they expected Paul to die shortly. So again, they're looking at him and they're like, well, that sucks for him because he's not long for this world. He's gonna puff up and die. As we look at, again, practical point number 3, which covers verses 3 and 4, God's protective hand is upon us even when we do not realize danger's presence. Again, God's protective hand is upon us even when we do not realize danger's presence. Listen, you all, I'm sure that there are times in your life where you can go back and you can remember a situation where you were going to go somewhere or you were going to hang out somewhere or you were going to do a thing. And, Holy Spirit was like, we need to stay in tonight. And again, you find out something bad happened or you didn't get in that car with those guys or those girls. And unfortunately, something bad happened and they didn't make it home. Again, you may not see it, but God's hand is especially those of us that are walking right. Those of us that our faith is strong. He is protecting you even when you don't see it, even when you can't see the danger lurking around the corner. He can and does and will protect you. Again, if it's his will. As we look at a change of opinion, which I've already kind of alluded to, and verse 5, which covers verse 5 and 6, and verse 5, and he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. So again, as we look at that verse, you see it right there. It's laid out. It doesn't say he screamed. Doesn't say he was in any agony. Doesn't say that the poison affected him. Doesn't say anything. He looked at the snake, was like, oh man, look at that. Wow, look at that. Get off me. Flung that mess right back, flung that snake right back into the fire and continued on about his business as if nothing happened. I'm not harmed. Yeah, you might see the bite marks where he latched on that, but there's nothing. I'm good, And verse 6, howbeit they looked when he should have swollen. Howbeit they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds, right, as humans do, and said that he was a god. So you see them go from this man is a criminal and he's getting his comeuppance to, well, he ain't dead yet. He's not swollen. He must be a god. Anybody that can withstand a snake bite like this man just did, he's not a man. He's got to be God. And again, as I alluded to earlier, folks, and that's human nature for you, right? You all may have had experiences where there were people either on your job or even in your family or, even in the church that you attend, where for whatever reason they had an opinion about you, good, bad, or indifferent. They just had an opinion about you, didn't know you from Adam, never had a conversation with you. And then for whatever reason, maybe they get to know you. And then all of a sudden their opinion shifts, right? Again, which indicates that you didn't really know me from jump if your opinion of me changed, right? And so you see that again in our daily walk, where you have people that have these opinions on people before they get to know them, and then, you know what, he's a good guy, or she's a good girl, or, they good people, right? But again, you may start off on one end of the spectrum, and then it may take some time for you to get to the other side. And again, as we look at this verse, so they're walking back and forth, and they're looking at Paul like, well, he should be dead, Yeah, he got bit. Yeah, he got bit. You saw the snake. I saw the snake. Well, it was definitely poisonous. Why is he not dead? There's got to be something to this man. And so as we look at a change of opinion, which again covers 5 and 6, the islanders looking on were familiar with the snake involved and had seen it actually hanging from his hand. Paul's survival was due to divine protection, just as he and his comrades had been protected during the storm. Again, as I said, they were out in that water for 2 weeks, just dealing with wind and rain and wind and rain and wind and rain, to the point that they had to throw everything overboard before they ran aground. And yet all of them made it to land. The Lord chooses many different methods to bear witness to himself in a sinful world and assure his own people of his direction. He had assured Paul and displayed his power to those with him by preserving their lives and bringing them safely to shore. Now God was reassuring Paul again that he would safely reach Rome, and he was manifesting his power to both islanders and voyagers to incite saving faith in them. So basically all of this was to show, tell me more about this God that you serve. Because you all were out there for 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Nobody died? You just got bit by a poisonous snake? And you're walking around like nothing. You didn't even scream. I want to know more about this God that you serve. Tell me more about, and again, and this is why it's important for us today as Christians to make sure that our walk is genuine. To make sure that you're backing up what you're saying with action, so that people can see and believe and say, you know what? I want to know more about this God that you serve. I want to know more about how he came in and changed your life. Tell me about the Holy Spirit that has been protecting and guiding you and helping you to discern different things. But again, if you don't exhibit that, if you're not modeling Christ, nobody's going to come to you. Nobody's going to want to know about Jesus if they look at you and say, well, why should I listen to you? Look at what you're doing. Look at how your life is. So we look at question number 4. Question number 4 asks, why did they soon afterward conclude he was a god? Again, as we've already kind of answered a little bit, it's human emotion. Wild swings. One moment I like you, the next moment I don't. I don't like you one moment, the next moment I do. Now, in a wild swing of opinion, the people concluded that Paul was a god. Superstitious pagans, devoid of any revelation of the true God, were greatly impressed by phenomena in nature. This is why these sorcerers and all of these other people who, would play with different things and essentially trick people and make them think that something happened when it really didn't. This is why they were so big, because, again, people were looking for something. And if you showed anything, they were going to be awed by it. Unfavorable events were interpreted as signs of disfavor by the gods, and favorable ones as a sign of their blessing. When events such as this one absolutely defied nature, they concluded that deity was present with them. Again, he's not dead. He didn't swell up. He didn't even cry out. He must be a god. A similar, and those of you that are familiar with Scripture, you've heard this before, and it is truly funny. And then it typifies these wild swings of emotions that we as humans go through. A similar event had occurred earlier in Paul's ministry, though the outcome was the opposite. At Lystra, the Lord had used Paul to heal a lame man. The people there concluded that Paul and Barnabas were gods. And not only were they convinced that they were gods, and they started to prepare to offer sacrifices to them. It was only with great difficulties that the apostles dissuaded them from doing it. But then the haters showed up. Those haters showed up and turned the people against Paul and against the apostles, and Paul was stoned. So you see, right, again, wild swings of emotion. At one point, see, in that particular case, they started out thinking that he was God. When he was like, don't offer sacrifices to me because I'm just a man, then here come the haters to whisper in their ear and get them all riled up. Oh, you don't want to take our sacrifice? Well, fine, we'll throw rocks at you. And so again, be careful. Again, be careful, folks, as you're walking your daily life. Make sure you get all of the information about somebody first before you form an opinion about them. In the absence of biblical convictions, human nature is extremely fickle, as I've already said. It is left at the mercy of error, emotions, and persuasive imposters. This is why it's very important to use the discernment that you have, especially when you're talking to different people, especially people claiming different things. Thus, we must always take care not to think or act on the basis of popular opinion. Again, don't follow the crowd, lest we be dragged from one extreme of error to another. Rock-like stability belongs to those who attach themselves to the eternal truths of God's word. Again, the word. You can stand on the word, right? You can stand on God's word and know that everything else might be fluff. God's word is not. For these natives, Paul had to be seen in extremes. Either he was terribly evil or considered a god. In truth, Paul was neither a criminal deserving of punishment, nor a god. This is all the more reason we must be cautious about what others think about us, either for the good or the bad. So again, sometimes people get the big head because everyone is throwing flowers their way, right? People tell them how great they are, how good they are, and all of a sudden you start to believe your press clippings, right? And so you may do different things a certain way that you wouldn't have done if you didn't have the big head. Or you may, because you think that everyone thinks negatively about you, that may cause you to lash out, and do things a certain way because, again, or you believe in your heart that people don't like you. Again, find a good balance, right? And as I said to the seniors in their video, it really doesn't matter what other people think about you. Now, don't be the guy or girl that goes around and just does things because you don't care what others think. No, you should be courteous or you should be considerate of others. But again, the most important opinion about you is the one that's going to judge you when we get before the righteous judge. So God's opinion is the opinion that matters most. What he thinks about me is the most important thing to me. We can be reassured that the Lord is intimately involved in every detail of our lives. God's faithful involvement in the lives of his people includes his magnificent protection. Again, not only was Paul protected in the case where the Jews wanted to kill him, right? He used his status as a Roman citizen to get out of that. God used the Roman soldiers, if you will, led by their commander, but he used them to safely get Paul out of the city. And then he protected him the whole time that they were on the boat dealing with the storm, and then protected him when a snake bit him. So again, you can see, and you know, again, you've heard me say it 1,000 times. You know your testimony. You know that situation that God protected you, or God brought you out of a situation where everyone around you thought that, yo, you're not going to make it. You're going to die. Maybe the doctor said, yeah, you're not going to make it. And there God's hand of protection was keeping you. God honors the faith of his people by faithfully delivering them from their trials or preserving them in the midst of their hardships. See, this is why you don't have to worry about the storm even while you're in the middle of the storm. Because again, whatever God's will is, that should be everyone's prayer. Whatever your will is for my life, Lord. If it's for me to go through this storm because you're trying to get me to the other side and prepare me for something better, then so be it. If it's for me to be in a good season and for you to open up the windows of heaven and rain down a blessing upon me, thank you. I'll receive it. So as we look at practical point number 4, which covers 5 and 6, never let the unexpected cause you to doubt God's clear promises. I'm going to say that again. And never let the unexpected cause you to doubt God's clear promises. Sometimes people prophesy things over our lives, right? And because we live in a microwave society where we want everything now, and it doesn't happen the way you want it to, then you think, well, I don't know if this is true. I don't know. Even though you've gotten confirmation from more than one person, you're still like, well, I don't know, man, because it's been a while, man. You know, he said this was going to happen, and again, God is a promise keeper. God is not man that he should lie. So if he said it, again, it's not a matter of if, it's when, and it's going to be on his time. As we look at the healing of Publius's father, which covers verses 7 and 8. And verse 7 says, in the same quarters were possessions of the chief man of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. So the part of the island that they came ashore on was the part of the island where the main person on the island lived, the chief man of the island. They came up upon his residence. And again, you see him, he's a leader of this island, right? Even though he's a representative, if you will, but he's the leader. And there he is, not thinking it robbery that he should not be out here helping get them warm, get them dry clothes, or get them some type of shelter to, again, serve their needs. Again, as I said earlier, just because you have a title doesn't mean that you shouldn't do small jobs. Again, you see this man not using his title as you guys wait right here and I'll call some people up, or I'll have my servant go run, and gather some people to come in and tend to you. No, he tended to them, while they were there. And then he not only did he tend to them, right? He was courteous to them. And you're going to see, folks, how his courteousness is going to bless his household. And as we look at verse 8, which is our golden text, and it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in and prayed and laid hands on him and healed him. So again, there's no coincidences with God, right? All of these things happened just the way God wanted it to. They landed at the exact right spot of the island so that they could get the most help possible, right? And in doing so, this opens up the door for Paul to go in. Again, he's already 2 miracles. The one that they survived the shipwreck, he survived the snake bite, and now you're going to see him again, as we saw in verse 7, as you see here in verse 8, he's going to enter in, he's going to lay his hands on him, he's going to pray, lay his hands on him, and then that man is going to be healed. And now even more people are going to be like, whoa, You survived the shipwreck, you survived the snake bite, and you just healed this man's father? Please tell us about this God that you serve. And so, as we look at the healing of Publius' father, through Paul's miraculous preservation, God opened up new opportunity or new avenues of ministry for him. And see, it's important because you might think, and again, those of you that saw last week's lesson, Jesus told Ananias, yeah, I'm going to let him know everything that he's going to suffer. You might have said, and listen, people have given up for less reasons, right? Let alone being beat, stoned, shipwrecked, stuck at sea, bit by a snake. But there he was, persevering, not giving up because of bad things that happened in his life. These began with a temporary stay with Publius, the chief man on the island. His estate lay in the region where the shipwreck had occurred, the northeast sector of Malta. Publius, a Latin name, implies that he was a Roman. As a chief official on Malta, Publius served under the governor of Sicily, to which the province of Malta belonged. So as we look at question number 5 asks, what did Publius do for the voyagers? Well, as I said earlier, he opened his home up and took care of them. Publius wrote, Luke received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. He gave the shipwreck survivors a gracious reception. Us probably refers to the entire group. Again, 276 people. Though this was a large number of people, Publius apparently had sufficient accommodations for all. Again, and that's just like God putting you in he put you with the right person at the right place at the right time. Question number 6 asks, what unexpected benefit did Publius's hospitality have for him? Well, as I said, his father was sick. Publius's hospitality brought him an unexpected reward, the healing of his father. His father lay sick of fever and a bloody flux, or it could have been dysentery. It could have been dysentery. The Greek actually reads fevers, indicating the recurring nature of the fever. This intestinal ailment may have been called Malta fever, which is common on the island. It has been traced to a microbe in goat's milk, and you can still get this today. So be very careful, those of you. Certain animals like goats, the milk, the cheese. There are other animals that can catch it, and it can be passed to you, and it will cause you 4 months of discomfort. Entering the presence of this sick man, Paul prayed for him, laid his hands on him, and healed him. As I said in the introduction, all of this mirrors what Ananias did for Paul in last week's lesson. God healed this man, yet it happened through the willingness and activity of Paul. God did the work, but Paul made himself ready and available for the work. Folks, please especially those of you that are Christian, always make yourself available and ready to do whatever God needs you to do at a moment's notice. As we look at question number 7, when Paul prayed for the healing of Publius' father, what did this demonstrate to others? And remember, we had already saw where they thought he was a criminal. Then they switched and thought, well, this man is a god. But now, this man who they thought was a god is now praying to his God. And so as we look at the answer, earlier Paul had been acclaimed as a god, but his praying would make it clear that he was dependent on a deity himself. It would also keep people from assuming that the healing came from his own power. Again, not my power, not Paul's power, God's power. Laying on of hands was a symbolic act signifying the impartation of a divine benefit. With this healing, Paul demonstrated that the God he served had power not only to protect him from a snake venom, from a snake's venom, excuse me, but also to restore health to others. It would also be a rapid fire fulfillment, and I love this, folks, of Jesus's promise that his followers, and get this, would take up serpents and lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. And that comes from Mark 16 and 18. As we look at our golden text again, as we illuminate it, it is not during the easy times that, it is not during the easy times that prove our faith, but the difficult times. Again, everyone loves it when we're in a good season. Everyone loves it when everything is going great. Everything is going our way. Those are great. It's when you're not going great. It's when things are falling apart. It's when things you don't know, you can't see. You can't see the sky for all of the storm clouds. And that's when you see the faith gets strengthened. Because again, if you can continue on the way Paul did, through all of the things that he faced. And listen, you all know, some of you have gone through a lot, and yet you have not flinched, and God bless you. Keep on having that unflinching attitude, that no matter what happens, I'm still going to have faith that whatever God said, he's going to do. For many of us, the healing is the highlight of this passage, yet we dare not miss the faithfulness of Paul in serving even when encountering difficulty after disaster. So again, why me, Lord? Why do I keep going through these things? You know what? I just want to go home. There is and I love this too. There is an old proverb. An old proverb says, "The same sun that hardens the clay softens the wax." The issue is not whether we have hearts of wax or clay. Sometimes, and it's unfortunate, believers encounter tragedy and become bitter. Faithful Christians face disaster and become more effective in their ministry. Unfortunately, some people face disaster and become bitter and angry, and they don't want to tell anybody about anything because you're in your feelings. Get out of your feelings. Believers should continue strong in service even when tragedy strikes. God did not promise that life in a cursed world would always be pleasant. He has promised, however, to see us through the difficulty and to strengthen us for service. Even if you go through trials, be strong and courageous and let God use you. Don't fold. Don't, woe is me. No, listen, this is an opportunity for me to be great. For God to use me to be great. As we look at the healing of others, which covers verse 9, so when this was done, others also which had diseases in the island came and were healed. And so again, as I said, this opened up the door for other ministry opportunities. They saw this man, they probably known that man had been dealing with that. Again, that was a disease that afflicted people for up to 4 months. So they knew that he was not well, and to hear, oh my God, this guy just laid hands on him. He healed him. Let me bring my sick. We need to we got to go down. And listen, folks, the truly amazing and blessing thing was, again, Paul was in custody. So he wasn't free to go all about the island and visit with different people. They had to come to him. And so they came to him. And as we look at this verse, and it's important to note, folks, as we look at "and were healed" at the end of the verse, this is not the same healing that we see in verse 8, where Paul laid his hands on Publius' father and he was healed. Luke, going back to that practical point about God will put the right people in the right place at the right time, Luke, who wrote Acts, was also a physician. So he had knowledge about the human body. So you've got Paul and you've got Luke with his background as a physician, and they were able to meet and minister to their needs. Paul spiritually, Luke physically. So again, God will provide the right people to be in the right place. You just need to be willing and able to go wherever it is he sends you. As we look at, again, the healing of others, just as the miracles of Jesus had drawn huge crowds to him, and we know from past lessons, so this display of apostolic authority by Paul soon led many others to seek him. As we look at question number 8 asks, why did the islanders go to Paul to be healed and not he to them? And I already ran ahead, so I'm sorry about that. But again, this was indeed a curious set of circumstances. As a prisoner, Paul was unable to go to them. As I said, they had to come to him, one who was confined under the accusation of being a criminal, to be healed. Isn't that something? Hey, listen, we got to take our sick down to that criminal down there so he can heal him. What a turn of events. Again, God is truly awesome. And the way that he can go in and work a thing out and completely use you to flip people's opinion. Not only flip their opinion on you, but flip their opinion on him. And the good that he did, and the good he did for them, was an evidence of the falseness of the charges, not only to the islanders, but also to the Roman soldiers who kept him confined. So again, as I'd already said, Paul had already earned favor with the centurion that was in charge of keeping an eye on him. And again, he was on the boat helping out, doing what he needed to do, not, again, taking it like, making sure that he took advantage of every opportunity to minister and serve others. And so people see that. And see, this is why it's important to make sure that your walk is genuine, because people are watching you. You may not know it. They may not say 2 words to you, but they watch you. They're watching your walk. And one day they're going to come up to you and say, hey, listen, I know I've never really spoke. We've never really had a conversation like that. But, I just want to say that your life has blessed me. I've heard you speak, and I see the way you conduct yourself and how you handle your business. You are a man or woman of God, and I can appreciate that. The word translated healed in Acts 28:9 differs from the one in the previous verse. It is a general term indicating that they were cared for, treated, cured, or healed. It allows for the possibility that not all cures were miraculous. Perhaps Luke, the physician, as I said earlier, had occasion to use his skills for them as well. And as we look at question number 9, why is it safe to surmise that Paul's ministry on Malta included more than just healing? Well, again, look at his background and look at his character. In reading this account, we must be careful to avoid the conclusion that Paul's entire ministry on Malta consisted on healing. And again, remember, folks, he was there for 3 months. So there was plenty of time, right? Though Luke said nothing about evangelism, we may be sure from Paul's other ministry and teachings that he used the miracles as a means of introducing the populace to the saving power of Jesus Christ. To do less than this would have been a betrayal of his calling. Again, remember, he was the apostles to the Gentiles. It was his job to take Jesus to them. We must also avoid the conclusion that miracles will always accompany the preaching of the gospel. And that's also important too. Listen, whatever God's will, if it's his will that a miracle happen, then a miracle will happen. But if it's just his will for the gospel to be spoken and for people to hear it, then that's just what it's going to be. Practical point number 5, which covers verses 7 through 9. One of the best ways to evangelize is to serve others in Jesus' name. I'm going to say that again, folks. One of the best ways to evangelize is to serve others in Jesus' name. Again, because people are watching you. If you say you're a servant, then you better be serving. It's as simple as that. The islanders' gratitude, which covers our final verse, verse 10, who also honored us with many honors, and when we departed, they laded us with such things as were necessary. Listen, so they were so happy with Paul, and they were so blessed by what he did, and they were so grateful that when it came time, because remember, folks, the ship ran aground. They had thrown off everything before the ship ran aground. So when the ship ran aground and they had to abandon it, they left whatever, which they didn't have much at that point, but all they had was what they had on their backs. And here these people are, right? These barbarous people, these idolatrous people who had not heard the gospel prior to Paul coming on the scene. And now 3 months later, they are sending them off with everything that they're going to need to make sure that they have a pleasant trip on to Rome. And as we look at Islanders' gratitude, again, the Maltese showered the travelers with many honors. We do not know what forms these honors took, but it surely means they continue to give them lavish hospitality for the rest of their stay. It was extended to the whole party, as I said earlier, folks, because one man, Paul showed his faith by giving himself to others. Again, not, listen, I got to prepare my defense for when I go before Nero, or, I'm Paul. It's not my job to do that, or, that's beneath me. Again, because he was giving of himself to others, again, you can see God's hand all over this. He's using the islanders, if you will, to make sure that, again, Paul makes it to where God has already sent him. Now, he didn't need them to do that because he could supernaturally make it happen. But again, as you saw in one of the earlier practical points, he will provide what you need. What could have been a bleak chapter in Paul's life became a time of fulfillment for him and blessing for others. It confirmed for him that the Lord accompanied him in all circumstances and that all things work together for good to them that love God. Listen, I don't care where you go. God is going. If you're a Christian, God is going with you everywhere you go. When followers of Jesus Christ experience extended periods of trials and sufferings, they often believe that their ministry to others must be temporarily interrupted. They become spiritually inactive as they wait upon the Lord to deliver them from their trial. Listen, rejoice irregardless of what's going on. You take the good with the bad. But whatever your ministry is, don't forsake it because you're not having the best time. Don't forsake it because everything is not lining up for you. Press on. And you'll see God. You'll see God bless you for not giving up, for not using your situation as a means to, I'm going to take the night off. Or, you know what, I'm going to take the next few nights off. Paul's 3-month stay on the island of Malta teaches us that the Lord can use us to impact others even in the midst of our trials. In fact, spiritual trials strengthen and equip us to grow in faith so that we can demonstrate God's power. Listen, if you've never been through nothing, you've not had your faith tested. You got to go through these things. And to be honest, you're going to go through them. You just need to, again, you've already passed the test. You just got to stand firm and don't give up and keep your faith. And faith, I love this. Faith will lead us to get involved with those around us. True faith will issue in service. And as we look at our final practical point, point 6, God often meets our needs in unimaginable ways, or in unimagined ways. God often meets our needs in unimagined ways. Again, they lost everything. Everything they had was lost when they had to abandon ship. And 3 months later, they were getting everything that they needed and probably even more. As we illustrate our lesson today, folks, faithfulness in difficult storms of life often opens the door for ministry to others. Again, faithfulness in difficult storms of life often opens the door for ministry to others. So don't forsake your calling because something is not lining up or things are going wrong in your life. As we conclude our lesson today, Paul was always prepared and armed with faith. He was ready when God wanted to use him. We too must be we too must be armed with power, with prayer and faith, and ready for God when he chooses to use us. Our faithfulness often opens the door for ministry to others in the strangest ways. And sometimes these come when our lives are badly shipwrecked. And so again, folks, as I always say at the end of our lesson, I want you all to, I hope you all were blessed by this, first of all. And I want to thank you all. You all set a record last week in last week's video. We were blown away, right? We were watching you all viewing it and we were just blown away. Please continue to share it. Please continue to like it. Please comment. We're working on some things, but please comment if you have comments. We will answer your questions if you have any. But as we normally do at the end of the videos, and I hope that this blesses you, and I hope that you take it and place it and put it into practical use in your daily walk. But for those of you that do not know Christ, I pray that this lesson has blessed you. Again, it's a simple thing. Confess with your tongue and believe in your heart that Jesus died. He was raised after 3 days. He died. He was buried. He was raised after 3 days. He is now on the right hand of God, interceding on our behalf. Heaven is ready to rejoice for you, and all you have to do is accept him in. Again, you see how Paul's faithfulness kept him through a myriad of things that came into his life. You can't have that faith, that peace, if you do not know Christ, if you haven't accepted him as your Lord and Savior. So please don't delay. Again, life is short. We are here today and we're going tomorrow. Tomorrow could be too late. Really, the next 5 minutes could be too late. So if it's on your heart to go ahead on and accept him into your life, please do so. And then when you do, please find a Bible-believing church and plug in with the brothers and sisters. So until the next time, and when I come before you again, we will be in our fall quarter. We will come with a brand new lesson, a brand new book. So until the next time, I will see you back again on the corner, JMG Corner Ministries. Until then, God bless.